From the Global Performance Audit Unit, this is Leading Voices. Real conversations on performance excellence, strategy, measurement, improvement, employee performance, and culture.
Welcome to Leading Voices, the Global Performance Audit Unit podcast, where we examine how strategy, performance systems, and leadership come together to shape organizational excellence. I am 𝐃𝐢𝐸𝐬, strategy and performance management expert, currently head of innovation and product design at the GPA Unit. In today's episode, we're going to focus on a question that many leaders are facing right now. How do large and complex organizations get to translate their ambitious vision into operational reality? How to build a performance management system that enables you to align various departments and units, and overall to execute strategy. My guest is Diogenis Papiomitis, a senior leader with extensive experience in strategy and performance management within the aviation sector. As General Manager for Strategy and Business Planning at MATARAT, he is supporting the organization's mission to transform Saudi airports into world-class aviation hubs. Welcome.
Thank you.
We will explore the intersection of strategy, corporate performance, and leadership within one of the most complex industries, from aligning long-term national priorities with operational ones to building integrated performance management systems that support better decision-making. I trust that our talk today will offer valuable insights to leaders seeking clarity, better alignment, and to create sustainable impact on their own organizations. So let's begin, but before we dive into the core of the discussion, please share with us some insights about yourself, about your professional career. What attracted you to performance management and strategy?
First of all, thank you for inviting me at this podcast. So my career is over 20 years now that I've been working in the aviation industry. I was always interested in two things. So one is aviation. From a young age, I wanted to be in aviation and work in this industry. And the second one is strategy. So strategy was always of interest, at least when I was started looking at career options for me, because it is about problem solving. And that part of strategy is what really attracted me. So finding a career that combined the two is something that I set my sights to at a very early age. And, I managed to do that. So 20 years I've worked as a strategy consultant in aviation. I worked for an airline. I work now for airports. So I've worked pretty much for the full supply chain, either in my capacity as a strategy consultant or as a strategy manager.
Has the aviation sector changed the way you would approach or see strategy and performance management?
Well, aviation is, I would say, a very complex industry that is full of uncertainty. There's so many different stakeholders involved in the aviation industry. It's a very regulated industry as opposed to, I would say, some of the other consumer-based markets. And it's very capital intensive. So I would say that whatever the role of a strategy manager is in any industry is double the complexity within aviation. So it provides more of a challenge in solving issues and solving problems within the context of the aviation.
What do you like most about your strategic role?
So today I'm a general manager of strategy. I like the fact that I work for a holding company. So I work across a number of our subsidiaries, operating companies, and working with them towards a common goal, common vision. But I also like the fact that I am in the strategy department because we are here to not only to solve issues, but obviously to set the direction, oversee the implementation, oversee the execution. We're not directly involved in operations, but we are here to make sure that the key outcomes for our operating companies and for the group are met and the vision is implemented.
Tell us more about MATARAT Holding, about the organization, so we understand a little bit more the context.
So MATARAT Holding is a strategic holding. We are an airport holding. We have 4 subsidiaries that are airport operators in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Overall, we own and manage 27 airports through those 4 operating companies. And we have also a fifth company that is under MATARAT Group, that is a logistics zone, a free zone in Riyadh. So overall, our main business is airports. And we play a key role, an enabler in the Vision 2030 of Saudi Arabia, and making sure that we have the capacity ready to accommodate the traffic demand and the expected inflows of tourists in the kingdom. So we're playing a very, very, I would say, key role, enabler role in the kingdom. But as a company, we are a strategic holding. We're not operating the airports ourselves. We oversee, we orchestrate. We make sure that all of the airports and all of the operating companies work towards that common goal. We try to standardize processes wherever it's possible, but we also make sure that there is customization because, there is 27 airports. Some are hubs, major airport hubs, Riyadh, Jeddah, Dammam, and then you have a number of other airports that are key players in their regions, their respective regions, and other domestic airports and tourism airports. So it's a kind of a portfolio that has different characteristics, and we try to play that role as an orchestrator.
And what are the challenges in playing this orchestrated role at such a big scale operation?
Well, I would say the main one is what I mentioned, which is trying to combine certain standardization of processes with customization at the local level. So the realities and the challenges and the needs and requirements of an airport that is located in one of the regions in Saudi Arabia. I would take the example of Dawadmi or Wadi Al Dawasir and some of the other airports is very different to the demands in Jeddah, which is an airport that has a very different passenger mix. Obviously, there's a lot of pilgrim traffic, religious traffic there. With the demands of an airport like Riyadh, which is obviously the economic hub of Saudi Arabia and the business center. So there's different demands, different passenger mix there. So I would say try to accommodate the needs of all of these different airports in one as a single ecosystem, trying to work towards the same goals. That is the main challenge of the job.
I was just thinking now as you were sharing this that lately I've been having discussions with 3 or 4 companies that they don't necessarily work in a highly operating, regulated environment, but they also have a type of holding structure. And then what happens there is that we see this gap sometimes between strategy, which tends to be somewhere up there in the ivory tower, and then the other subsidiaries or the execution. And I would ask you if you can share from your experience, what would be the optimal standardization? So how much standardization is actually helpful? Because you need to have an alignment and a common language, and how much customization? Because what I have seen, for example, the companies I was mentioning, is that they are struggling with significant fragmentation given by what you would call customized. I know every subsidiary will say, I'm in a different industry, I need to run my business as I know. So what's the sweet spot there?
Well, first of all, I think with our holding company, we are a homogeneous group, meaning that we all work in the airport industry. So obviously, there is standardization primarily because of that. We don't have subsidiaries that are providing services other than within the airport environment. Our airports, again, I would start with the commonalities, right? Mm-hmm. So the airports are capital intensive. They build capacity that has a life of 20, 30 years. So you need to plan 20, 30, 40 years even ahead of time to make sure that you have a master plan, to deliver on that master plan and build the infrastructure. So there is certain things that are common across, in terms of the business model of these mm-hmm. airports. There is also commonality in terms of we all try to, I would say, achieve certain objectives, which is to improve customer experience to the passengers that arrive and depart from our airports, achieve operational excellence, make sure that planes leave on time, right, and the turnaround for passengers is done on time. We also try to make sure that we are financially sustainable, and that we have the right capacity at the right time to accommodate the demand. So I think these are the main things that are common. The I would say the main issues in terms of the standardization and where that doesn't actually apply is when it comes to the maturity, the current maturity of these companies and of some of the airports, because I mentioned 4 companies. Those companies were set at different points in time. There's some that were established in 2015, others that were established in 2022. So in terms of the maturity of the processes, the systems, the people, it's not always there. So therefore, we need to place more emphasis on bringing everyone to the same level of maturity. So there is customization in terms of meeting those demands. And then, of course, there is other things as well. I mentioned before that the traffic profile of Jeddah is very different to the traffic profile of Riyadh and Dammam. Right? So in Jeddah, you're dealing with religious traffic. So people who, arrive at the airport, which is probably their first time flying, who arrive for Hajj and Umrah pilgrim. So therefore, the kind of demands and what the services that you need to provide at that airport is very different to what you would in Riyadh, which is, again, it's a very established business hub. So there is obviously differences in terms of maturity. I would say one, passenger mix is the second one.
Do you think it's helpful? Because, you gave me some examples now, and they were focused mostly on our strategy and our directions. But in terms of the strategy management blueprint or the performance management blueprint, do you think it's effective in this context to adopt a similar framework? I don't know if to say everyone should be defining the strategy and we all use a balanced scorecard, or we all use a hybrid between OKRs and a balanced scorecard, whatever the blueprint is it feasible? Should it be the same, or it's better to let each airport, in this case, to come up with their own way to articulate and frame strategy and their KPIs?
Well, we found that what works is if you set the framework, if you set the requirements at a group level. So you say that, yes, a balanced scorecard needs to be the framework that we all use because we feel that it works. It worked in the most mature company, and we believe that this can be implemented across the group. So we find certain processes or best practices or frameworks, and we cascade these to the organizations. However, what goes into the balanced scorecard, which KPIs we use, is up to the companies themselves. They identify the ones that they believe are accurate and perhaps serve their purpose based on their passenger profile, based on their particular realities, and they use that. So we're not involved in the actual, I would say, day-to-day or implementation of the framework, but we do set certain standards and processes across.
And then how do you manage to transform MATARAT's vision of transforming the Saudi airports into a world-leading aviation hubs? It's quite a bold vision. How do you get to transform or to translate that vision into objectives that are concrete and tangible, and into tangible performance measures, and also to ensure that you don't translate just at airport level, but it gets down even deeper into these entities?
Well, I think we have an advantage in aviation in the fact that there is a national plan. There's a national aviation strategy, national aviation, I would say, framework and plan. And therefore, we know what matters for the country in terms of objectives for aviation, some very high-level targets. So we know that, for example, customer experience is a number one priority. The kingdom and the aviation industry is striving to improve customer experience across airports, airlines, ground handlers, and suppliers. So we know that this is a major national objective, I would call it. And so cascading that is straightforward, right? That, we translate that into specific KPIs and targets for each of the airports and for each of the operating companies. So we start with a very strong, framework coming from the national plan, and then we cascade those objectives and those targets to each airport, considering, of course, the current maturity of that airport and that company. I think that apart from that, so we have a very good starting point. I think outside of that, our job is to work with them to define what are the processes and indicators, leading indicators that have an impact on those objectives, and define the KPIs and the targets that are appropriate for those organizations.
Thank you. We mentioned earlier, I mentioned about the balance scorecard, and I was wondering what's the performance management philosophy, or if there's a particular framework that you're using inside the holding.
So we use the balance scorecard as the main framework, main performance management system. But again, the framework is set. We have set strategic objectives, and therefore we do require KPIs that meet those objectives. In the balance scorecard, we don't have a set number of parameters. Like a typical balance scorecard has 4 parameters. The financial, customer, internal process, and therefore we focus on what makes sense for each airport, operating company. For some airports, it's going beyond those 4 parameters and going into capacity, going into other metrics. So we customize accordingly. So there's a broad framework. We make sure that we have a balanced, I would say, framework of both customer, operational KPIs as well as internal processes, and of course, learning and growth, the learning and growth parameter. But beyond that, each operating company is free to look at other parameters that are applicable to them.
How about technology? What has been the impact of digitalization and the technology on performance management systems?
Well, I think the first thing is that it enables more insights. So more insight-driven or data-driven decisions. Before, I would say digitalization, but I would say before automation of certain processes, we would look at KPIs. It would be very, very, I would say, dry approach into understanding the performance. Now we have obviously a lot of data. We have visualization. We have dashboards. So we're able to make better sense. But I think the major advantage of having gone through this process is that it enables better discussions with the different teams in the companies. So better discussions to understand the issues, to understand where there is divergence from the target, and to come up with, I would say, evidence-based solutions to improve operations, to improve the performance. So we come with action plans, for wherever we have an underperforming KPI. We understand the root cause, so we do the root cause analysis through these systems, and we come with action plans that are implementable, that can be cascaded down to the implementation teams. So I think that the main advantage of what we've gone through over the last few years is that we now have that visualization. We have those insight-driven discussions. Outside from that, obviously with the advances in AI, we're trying to use now also within the strategy environment. We want to use agentic AI. We want to use AI for in an advisory capacity, but AI is a supporting role. It's not obviously taking over the responsibilities of the strategies that work in this sector.
Indeed, you showed me very well what are the advantages of data, but have you also faced the reverse, the other face of the coin, the fact that once you have access and you're collecting more data about your business, did you have difficulties actually distinguishing now what is just data and what is actually key for us?
Yeah, and I think it's a learning process, of course. You have, I would say the organization of 2026 is very different to the organization of 2016, or 20, 30 years ago, right? So we have a lot more data, and of course with that comes a lot more noise, right? And trying to actually identify what actually is a true insight, or what can give you a true insight to what is potentially diverting your focus, right? Is it's a challenge, but it's a learning process. It's something that we're trying to do now, with more data, we're trying to integrate. And I think the key here is integration of the different systems, because once you have integration, is where you can actually do the correlation, and you can identify what is important, right? What information, what insights you need. So I would say this is it's a challenge. But if you start with what problem you're trying to solve and what insights you're trying to derive, you work backwards and you identify the data points, right? You identify what needs to be provided and what needs to be shared among the group to make the decision.
I think that actually the more clarity you have around your strategy and what is important, the easier it is then to actually integrate this high volume of data into your decision-making process. So I think that it might be an easier endeavor for organizations who already have a high level of understanding of how their strategy and KPIs are actually structured, what's the blueprint behind it, and then seeing technology as just an enabler, a tool that is accelerating their decision-making process, the discussions. Do you have any practical application of AI in strategy that has proved to be effective so far? Or you're still in the testing phase?
We're still in the testing phase, but I would say that the main one would be as a strategy advisor, as I mentioned before. We have, in aviation, I would say every industry is probably similar, but in aviation, we have many, many different data sets. Obviously the strategy plans, but then we also have master plans for infrastructure development. We have business plans, and as a group, as a holding company, we have every single data set multiplied by 5, so 5 operating companies, right? So as an advisor, trying to ask natural language questions into a system that has an up-to-date knowledge of your master plans, your strategy plans, your business plans, that understands the projects that we're investing in and that we are implementing. So asking questions as to based on the performance of this KPI, which project should I be investing in, right? Which one has the highest ROI? Based on history, we have obviously many projects in the database. So I think this kind of questions, I see that as adding a lot of value in our profession.
How do you manage? I think it all somehow connects. If you have strong data capabilities, definitely helping you have a more agile approach to strategy. But in the same time, you are in an industry in which your planning horizon is rather long term, right? Mm-hmm. But then it's also dynamic through its nature. So how do you manage this long term priorities with the unexpected and with all the data that sometimes the system is feeding you from the operations from the airports directly?
Well, again, we understand where we need to be in the next 5-10 years. I would say even longer, because obviously, as you said, it's a capital intensive and with long asset lives. So we do have a broad understanding of the next 20-30 year horizon. We have a very good understanding of the next 5 years, of where we need to be in the next 5 years. And on a day-to-day, of course, we are not, as a holding company, we're not involved in the day-to-day, meaning that is left to the operating companies. But we're working with them. We have a mix of, I would say, if I take the balance scorecard, we have a mix of leading and lagging indicators. So we have, through the last few years, I think, and through the use of technology, understand which leading indicators have the biggest impact, and that might actually divert us from our goal, our targets. So we have very informed, I would say, sessions with the strategy teams of our operating companies on a regular basis. And of course, this is, again, it's a learning process, right? So we are improving, and every time that we go through a performance review and a performance assessment, we're improving in terms of understanding better the data, understanding better, what is underperforming what is performing according to target, and then making the right decisions.
What do you find to be the ideal strategy review cycle, or if you want, the ideal frequency at which we have to, just take a breath and stop looking so in depth into the numbers, but rather step back and see whether there's any updates from the external environment?
I would say ideally twice a year you would need to do that. You would need to step back, see, revisit your business plan, revisit your 5-year view, and make corrections. Ideally even more often. However, again, we are in a very dynamic industry that, and also I would say very regulated industry in aviation. So for us, we make sure that at least once a year, we work with all of the strategy teams of our companies. We sit down, we review the 5-year business plan. We make major adjustments wherever those are needed because things are moving very fast. And then I would say the second time that we meet in the year is more about making smaller corrections rather than major adjustments. So a business cycle or a strategy review cycle that is annual, with a half-year kind of a stop and check, health check, for the rest of the year and the rest of the period.
I find that to be more common and probably more feasible, especially for larger organizations, although you might say, okay, in some industries, even quarterly, they need to take a breath and adjust some things. How would you define, or what would be some characteristics that would illustrate a state-of-the-art performance management system today? Strategy and performance management, let's put them somehow together.
I would say integrated is the first one, like that it has to be integrated with all of the other systems in the company, whether that is employee management, whether that is the financial planning and budgeting process. So a performance management system that is integrated across the organization, and obviously for us, it's across the group. Right. So meaning that, we're taking the view of the group direction, the group performance. That is our focus. So as a holding company, it's slightly different to as an operating company. But for us, it's integration at 2 levels, right? Integration at a group level, integration also within the company across functions. And then agile as well. I would say the second priority would be for it to be agile, meaning that it can consider changes in the business environment, that it can accommodate changes to in the business environment, that you don't, I would say, develop KPIs that are rigid, that are not flexible enough, that you cannot change as the business environment changes. So adaptable.
Are you thinking about the target here, or what would be like a rigid KPI?
I would say that targets definitely, but in terms of the KPIs, there are some KPIs that are, I would say very board specific. The board is asking for a view on the financial performance. However, for us to make a change to those KPIs, requires a very lengthy process of approvals. So to be able to add to that and be able to adjust those KPIs as and when needed is a key function, a key I would say an advantage in our industry, right? So we're trying to do that. So in every review cycle where we look at our KPIs together with our board, we look at whether, and I'll give you an example, but we look at whether these should be long-term KPIs that we're making sure that everyone performs according to our target set, or whether those should be adjusted because the priorities change. So as an example, in aviation, in airports, we have commercial revenues. There's a big chunk of our revenue that is regulated. It's aeronautical. And then there's the part that is fully within the control of the airport to improve, which is non-aeronautical revenue. You can look at non-aeronautical revenue either as an absolute, which is something that typically we had in the past, so non-aero revenue, or you can look at it from the point of view as a per unit, so non-aero revenue per pax. So in the last 2 years, we've changed our focus, from increasing growth or focusing on the growth of the non-aero revenue at an absolute to a growth per passenger. Because we felt that, this is, again, is an environment where we need to make sure that we're performing better every year, and we're growing very fast. Our traffic is growing at 10% every year. So we said, okay, traffic is growing 10%, so your non-aero will grow. But how do you make sure that you're performing better every year? You focus on how much revenue you have from each individual passenger. So you're making it on a per unit basis. So I would say that flexibility is something that we're trying to put into the performance management.
I like what you said, and I think this is a very good example from what we talked earlier related to how much standardization and how much flexibility you have while still maintaining the alignment. So when it comes to standardization, okay, you can have those KPIs from the upper level that you have to monitor and keep track of, but that doesn't stop you for either adjusting a similar measurement that is specific to your operations and what you need in order to improve, what you showed us earlier, or simply identifying contributing KPIs that are leading to that bigger goal that I'm trying to higher level KPI that I'm trying to achieve. And then that would be a type of alignment through contribution, not necessarily direct cascading. So what I've seen often is that this is an area in which organizations can improve to create alignment, because sometimes when you have at the top and then the other section, whatever it is, whether it's a subsidiary or whether it is even a business unit, it can be, when they work individually and they just come together, sometimes there's a missing layer of finding the correlation between the upper level KPI and the one that the entity at the lower level actually has and how they relate. You can have very relevant KPIs for your unit, for what you do, but still miss that link with the upper level, which leads us to that situation in which, the department is doing great, but the company itself is not actually progressing in the direction. Thank you. So we have integration, and then you said agility. Is there any other characteristic you would think about?
From a performance management system?
Yes.
I would say the ability to be, I mentioned integration, but it is to be linked to performance and incentives and employee performance. Because sometimes we do set KPIs at a corporate level or at the departmental level, but this is not always translated into how you incentivize and what type of performance you need to incentivize for the employees. So I think this is key because we've had this challenge in the past where you have the long-term vision, you have the corporate KPI that says you need to improve your financial sustainability. You need to grow your revenues or your profits by X percentage. That is cascaded down to some departments, but there is no, and you identify that in employees are not really incentivized to look at financial sustainability. They're incentivized to focus on growth, right? So it depends on what your focus is, what is your priority, and how you translate that down from the corporate, the board level KPIs down to the departmental KPIs and to the employees. So I think that link means that you have to work together with the human capital department, with change management. You need to work together and in a coordinated way. So if there are silos in the organization, that is a big challenge. Because again, sometimes you feel that, you're making progress, you're meeting certain targets, but you understand that not everyone is on board. Not everyone is incentivized to perform in a certain way.
I like that you brought this up, the link between strategy and HR. So I would ask you, in your case, where does HR get involved as part of the, I don't know, annual strategy review process or the review that you do every 3 or 5 years?
Okay, so in the annual strategy review, which is typically done in Q3 and Q4 of every year for the year ahead, we look at, again, it starts obviously at the corporate level. So we look at what are our priorities for the year ahead. We look at what are the strategic objectives for the organization, or in our case, is a group. So it's a group of companies. We look at the KPIs and we set the targets at a group level. The second part is where human capital is involved, which is translating those into what is the role of each department in every company to meet those objectives. So, and here again, we have 5, and with us six companies. So it is 6 HR departments and 6 strategy teams that are working in that translation, that transition from corporate to employee incentives. So we work with them in the second level, which is the cascading from corporate to department, and also with the moving into the third level, which is the translation into employee objectives and performance targets. So we involve them very early on, but it's on an annual basis. It's for each year's annual cycle.
Well, since we've entered this area now related to people performance, how do you nurture and build that culture, that mindset of continuous improvement and being performance oriented among employees, among managers?
First of all, is through sharing of responsibility and accountability. And I would say that, it's very important that everyone is aware of what the target and what is the strategic objective, what is our strategy, where are we trying to get to, what are we trying to achieve. So aligning with the employees through town halls and through change management initiatives, understanding why we're investing in certain projects, I think it's key. So is being able to work with them, with the employees, and understand where we're trying to get to. So that's the main focus.
Now, my question was, how do you manage to create this engagement and awareness so that there's a mindset towards the result? And you shared that, through accountability, to engaging them.
Through, again, is the challenge I mentioned is that, there's the 6 companies, that is the holding, and the 5 operating companies, right? So our job is to make sure that our employees at a holding level, who actually have 2 responsibilities, right? One is to work with our operating companies to enable their performance and manage and achieve together their targets. But the second, of course, is that, as a holding, we have a separate set of objectives and targets for our company. So, we all wear 2 hats. One is for the holding, meaning that what we are trying to develop, what services we should be developing, what's our value proposition as a holding company. And then the second one is, how do we enable our operating companies to perform better? So it is, from our side, we do need to make sure that our employees in MATARAT understand, the overall objectives, the direction for the company, and why we're doing what we're doing, like why we're investing in certain projects, and what is the value of those projects, to bring them together. And the second aspect is to work with our operating companies to make sure that they cascade down to their own departments as well, in a similar way.
And I imagine that given the way you're organized, in each company, you have the key contact people, whether it's a KPI champion or HR has their representatives, so they help with spreading the message widely across all entities, right?
Well, okay, for MATARAT Holding, yes. So we have performance champions in every department. For the operating companies, we are cascading the corporate KPIs But it is their job, as an operator and their companies to actually cascade down to their individual departments.
Related to culture and building awareness, do you have any communities of practice inside MATARAT and initiatives to share knowledge cross-functionally between airports, but perhaps also within the holding?
So yes, definitely. Within the holding, as I mentioned before, that we have performance champions in every department. So we work together with those performance champions. We have regular workshops to understand the performance of its department, as well as to look at the next year ahead and, what are the priorities for its department and related to the organization, and how its department delivers value for the benefit of the organization. With our operating companies, we've actually we started a year ago, we started working with them in strategy forums. So we host, and at different airports during the year, we host strategy forums to tackle priorities. And it could be different from forum to forum. The last one we had was related to the 5-year business plans. The one before that was looking at best practices in strategy management and the use of tools such as the balance scorecard, and whether there could be some adaptation to the realities and to the requirements of each company. So we do have these regular forums, discussion forums, and we try to invite colleagues from other departments as well, whether that is finance, commercial, human capital. These forums we find is great because it is about best practice sharing. And as a holding, we don't always bring the best practices. It could be some of our operating companies that have been working on a particular issue for a long time. They have certain views, and others can benefit from that. So it's a forum for, I think, best practice sharing, and of course is getting away from the day-to-day job, just to actually reflect and see how we can improve in the strategy operations.
That sounds great. And I imagine that you get to collect a lot of innovative ideas and suggestions from this. Last year, 4 of the airports in MATARAT Holding have achieved high maturity levels in project management. And then last year also we had the Riyadh Airports Company that obtained maturity level 4 in the integrated performance maturity model of the GPA unit. So what have been the benefits that you have seen for the organizations in using these maturity models?
Well, I think there's two main benefits. Of course, there's more, but the main one is, of course, is pride, because once you achieve a certain maturity level, then your employees feel proud that the company and everyone work together to achieve that, because it's a team effort. It's not a particular department or individual. So it's an achievement for the whole organization. So the pride is by itself justifies doing these maturity assessments. However, I'd say that the main on a working level, the main benefit is that it's a time of it's a reflection. Of course, maturity modules are a reference point. You see what works, what are the best practices in other organizations, and where you are today. So it's a benchmark. But at the same time, it's a reflection on the things that you can improve to become more efficient. So those two things, I think, justify why all organizations should actually invest in these.
Thank you for a very insightful discussion today. I trust that there were many valuable insights on the matter of alignment. And yes, I can agree with you on what you said, that maturity levels are important for organizations in helping them get clarity on their improvement journey. And this is the core of what we do at the GPA unit. We're trying to provide various assessment solutions that leaders can use to know where they are at the moment and what would be the most critical areas that they can improve to their strategy and performance management systems, so that they have this gradual increase of the practices, which inevitably is going to help the organization achieve lasting performance results. We hope today's episode offered an insightful perspective to your strategic journey. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you soon in our future episodes from Leading Voices podcast.
Thank you for listening to Leading Voices by GPA Unit. Subscribe and follow us through the links in the description.